Hello everyone and welcome to another Devlog video for Homegrown, the casual farming game I'm making using my own engine. And this week I'm going to be working on some big changes to the compost system. So it is just gone past 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning, and today I'm going to be starting the big compost update, which I'm really looking forward to. I've been planning this one for quite a while. I made a Devlog video a long time ago about my first iteration of the compost system, and I got a lot of feedback on that video, so I've had a lot of ideas. I've spent a lot of time thinking about how I want to improve the compost system, and I'm going to be getting started with that today. I've already got a pretty good rough idea of what I want to implement. I'm just going to spend a bit of time now planning that out in a bit more detail, and then hopefully I'll get started with some programming later this morning. Let me just quickly remind you of how the compost system works at the moment. So when you're working in your farm, digging, weeding, harvesting, you're going to get these plant matter items, which is plant waste that you can put into a compost heap, and then whenever you want, you can put over the tarp to turn it into compost. Then, using a bucket item, you can take the compost from the compost heap and spread it over the soil, which is useful because some plants require the compost to be able to grow properly. Then, on top of this, I had an almost separate system where you can buy bags of special compost from the shop in the town, and these composts have effects associated with them, like this compost here, for example, which gives a growth boost to your plants while also making the soil dry out less quickly. With these bags, you fill up a compost bin, and then the rest is the same. You take the compost with the bucket and apply the compost and those effects to the soil. So there are two big things that I don't really like about this. Firstly, it's almost two separate systems, and secondly, the compost mixes are all predetermined. You have this limited set of effect combinations that you have to choose from. So the aim this week is to combine the two systems and allow the player to create not just their own compost, but also their own unique compost mixes with the effects of their choice. So very briefly, the way that I plan for the new system to work is, if this is your compost heap, looking at it from above, you're going to create plain compost like usual, and then you're going to be able to place these extra containers around the compost heap, and in these containers you'll be able to put extra fertilizers or nutrients, and these are going to get applied to the compost when you take compost from the compost heap. And it's these extra nutrients that determine what effects, what buffs your compost has. So by picking and choosing the different nutrients, you'll be able to create your own unique compost mixture with exactly the buffs that you want it to have. I thought I'd start by working on the nutrient containers. So obviously I haven't worked on the visuals for these yet, but you can place them in the world. They have to be placed next to a compost heap, and when you place them, you can see they automatically connect up with a pipe to the compost heap. You might remember a few devlogs ago I showed you how I implemented this connecting behavior. I used the fences as an example there, and I was just able to use that same system here. I had to make a few tweaks because it's a little bit different to the fence, in that the containers don't connect to each other. They're connecting to a separate, different type of entity. So I just had to make a few little changes to get that to work properly. So I've been working on the visuals for the container next, which is unfortunately proving to be a little bit difficult. Firstly, I want some of the container to be made of glass so that you can see how much is inside it. But I don't have support in my rendering engine for rendering glass yet, so that's something I need to add. And then secondly, I want the contents of the container to be able to scale to show you how much is in the container. And again, that's a bit tricky because I still want this whole thing to be one entity, but I need that central part to be moving independently of the outside container. And again, my rendering engine doesn't have support for that yet. So I've just been working through a bit of a restructuring of the rendering system, but I'm going to take a quick break now to go for a run. I'm actually doing the Hamburg Half Marathon in a couple of days, so I've been training for that a lot recently. but just going to go for a short run today. I don't want to tire my legs out too much before the race. So it's about a day later. This has been taking a long time, but I'm making some progress finally. I've now allowed every entity to have multiple sub-meshes if it wants. So you can see here the container is now made up of two parts, the outside part and the inside part, and those inside contents are able to scale independently of the outside container. So it's a good start. There's still lots that's not working here. Serializing isn't working, frustum culling has broken, and I need to get the contents to scale on just one axis instead of all three, but at least I'm finally getting somewhere. Okay, so it's all working now. I've spent a long time on making big changes to the rendering system to get this to work, but they were important changes and other features in the game will make use of this as well. But yeah, you can see I can fill up these containers, I can empty them. In the end, I didn't actually scale the contents, I'm just moving it up and down on the y-axis, so it actually goes into the ground, but it looks the same. And I can also change the color of the contents to make it look like there's a different liquid in the container. So next up, I've got to do the glass rendering, but I'll start work on that tomorrow. Ten to 7 on Sunday morning. I'm up nice and early today because I wanted to get a decent breakfast before the half marathon, which starts at 9 o'clock today. I'm really excited. I've not done one of these events before, so it should be a fun experience. Just before I go, I've been doing a bit of work on implementing the glass rendering into my render system, and it's almost working in the game now. But I'll show you more of that later. It's time for me to set off now. Back home now, half marathon went very well. I completed my goals, which were firstly just to complete it because I've never actually run that far before, and secondly I was hoping to get under 2 hours, which I managed as well. So I was very satisfied. It was really warm. I was pretty dead by the end. I don't know how people run a full marathon because the thought of having to do all that again is pretty tough. I'll have to do lots and lots more training if I ever want to be able to manage that. Maybe next year. Anyway, time to get back to game development. The glass rendering's all working properly now. I also made a new model for the container. I'm just trying out different shapes. I'm not sure exactly how I want the container to look yet, but this is what I'm using for now. And I'll add more shader effects to the glass in the future to make it look a bit shinier, maybe a bit reflective. But for now, what I wanted to get working was the transparency. It's always a bit of a pain working with transparency in OpenGL. You have to get the rendering order correct, because if you don't, you get issues where you can't see objects through the glass that you should be able to see. Basically, any object that you want to be able to see through the glass needs to be rendered before you render the glass. So I just had to do a bit of extra work to make sure that everything is rendered in the correct order. So the visual part of this update is all done now. That was the hard part. I wanted to get that out of the way first. So today I can move on to implementing some of the actual functionality for this feature, which is going to be a lot more fun. I thought I'd start off by making the item for the nutrients or the fertilizer that you put into the containers. So you can buy these items from the shop in the town now, and then you can click on one of the containers with them to fill up the container with that particular fertilizer. You can't do it on a container that already has a different fertilizer type in it though. It has to be an empty container or one that already has that type of fertilizer in it. A few more little changes. So you can inspect one of the fertilizer containers now to see what it's got inside it. You can also inspect the compost heap and it will list out all of the fertilizers that are attached to it. And then I've also been doing a bit of work on the effects that the fertilizers will have, the buffs that they'll give to your plants and soil. So each fertilizer now has one effect, and you can see them in the shop here. I'm doing some work on the colour of the compost now, because I want the colour to change depending on what fertilizers are mixed in. So now you can see that the compost takes the colour of the fertilizer when I mix in a fertilizer. The question though is what should happen when I add multiple fertilizers. The obvious answer would just be to mix the colours, but when you do that, if you've got more than about 3 fertilizers, it pretty much always goes to brown, which is not particularly useful, so I need to think of another way to do that. So the way I've decided to do this is that if you're just using one fertilizer, then the compost takes that colour, but as soon as you start using multiple fertilizers, then each combination basically just has a random colour associated with it. The same combination will always give the same colour, but apart from that, the colours are pretty much random, which I think is fine, because the main aim of these colours is just to help you distinguish between your different compost mixes. So for example, if I had one compost mix that I'd made for root vegetables, for example, and another that's good for fruiting plants, then the colour would help you to tell which is which, not just when it's in the compost heap, but also when it's in the bucket. You can see the colour is shown next to the bucket, so you can tell which is which, and also when you put the compost on the soil, you can also see the colour in there. I do need to redo the compost texture at some point. It doesn't look very good, and it's also not very clear what colour it is, but you get the point. And of course, you can always just mouse over anywhere where there's compost to see exactly which fertilizers are in there. I've just been doing a bit of work on the balcony, so while I'm out here I thought I'd give you a quick update to show you how it's all going. So the beetroot is doing a lot better than last time. Looks like that's going to be ready to harvest soon. Then the carrots here, they're doing fine. The tomatoes are looking really good, but haven't harvested any yet, they're all still green. I've got a few herbs here. Then the blueberry bush, one half of it obviously still dead, but the other half has started producing berries, so hopefully we'll be getting a harvest from that after all. And then the beans here have been getting absolutely battered by the wind recently, so they're not looking great, but they're just about surviving, and there are some beans growing, so I'm hoping to get the first harvest from that soon. And then down here I've just been planting a new set of radishes. So I'm going to be taking a bit of a break from working on the compost for the next week or so, because this Saturday it's going to be exactly 10 years since I started making devlog videos on YouTube, and I've got a big video planned to go out on Saturday, which is going to be looking back at the last 10 years of my game development journey. So I've got lots of work to do on that. I'm going to be going through all of my old devlog videos to find the best footage to put in the video, so it's going to take a long time, but I've still got about 5 days till the video goes out, so should be fine. But yeah, I'm not going to be working on the compost until next week, so I'm actually going to a concert this evening. I'll put footage of that in next, and then I will see you in a week's time when I'm back working on the compost, which for you will be in like 15 seconds. So it is now a week later. I finished the 10-year video and uploaded it a couple of days ago, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. I spent way longer working on that video than I've ever spent working on a video before, but I think it was worth it, and the response so far has been really, really great. I've had so many lovely, kind, supportive comments on that video, way more than I can reply to, but I promise I've read every single one, and I really appreciate it. So thank you to everyone who wrote a comment on that last video. It does mean a lot to me. Anyway, I need to be getting back to work on the compost today. and it's been a while, so I can't really remember what I was working on, but I think I'm almost done, so hopefully I'll be able to finish everything up today. The compost system is finally finished, so I'd like to give you a quick demonstration of the whole thing in action. Firstly, compost bins now work in exactly the same way as compost heaps, so you can fill them up with plant waste and close the lid to turn it into compost, but it is a lot smaller and can't hold as much as a compost heap, and it only has 2 connection points for the fertilizer containers, whereas the compost heap has 4, so it is worth upgrading when you can. So let's make some compost in here, and it will be possible to be self-sufficient in terms of making compost from your plant waste, but depending on what plants you grow and which tool upgrades you choose to invest in, you might not have enough plant waste for your needs, so I've made it possible to buy bags of plain compost from the shop if you need a top-up. Let's now go into town to get some fertilizers so we can add some buffs to our compost, and obviously in the future there are going to be way more fertilizers with all sorts of possible effects and different strengths and of course different costs, but for now I'm just going to buy the growth boost, the moisturizer to keep the soil moist, and the weed minimizer so that the weeds don't grow as fast. Back at the farm, I'll add those fertilizers into the empty containers, and I've now created a compost mix with those 3 buffs. So I'll take some of this in my bucket. That takes not only from the compost, but it also takes from the fertilizer containers as well, so they will need to be topped up at some point. And I'll go ahead and spread the compost over this area here, and then I'll water those seeds that I've already put here, and we'll see what happens. So after a bit of time, the difference is very clear. Not only have these plants grown faster thanks to the compost, but the soil is also staying wet for longer, meaning I don't have to water as much, and if we wait even longer, you'll see that the weeds have come up much stronger in the areas without the compost. So that is the new compost system finished. I'm really happy with how it's turned out. I do want to do a bit more work on the visuals at some point, because it does look a little bit chemically, a bit like a science lab, which isn't really what I'm going for. But in terms of the functionality and actually creating your own compost mixes, I'm very satisfied. Before I finish, I want to give a big shout out to the top Patreon supporters from last month, who were Sardek Brewman, Andy Connell, A Brave Panda, Coda the Tyler, Ross from 2 Minute Tabletop, Nikat Asgazada, Zanil Ambakar, Walden Yan, Me the Pig, Chris Naismith, Alan Lance, Josiah Hillman, One-Off, Dieter Reinert, Harry Chung, John Needham, Christoph Hubho, Adam Farkas, Hagen Vingard, Matthew Connaughton, Andrew Witt, Marek Mikolajczyk, Sean McCrory, John Langer, Kathleen Coder, Timothy Gibbons, Alexander Chavez, and Neil Blakey Milner. So a massive thank you to you guys, and of course to everyone else supporting me over on Patreon. For this week though, that is it, so thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you all again next time.